Our guest this week is an author, professor, and marketing executive, but he is most interested in things and ideas that move people. He's the author of the book, Simply Put, Why Clear Messages Win and How to Design Them. So here to share with us the surprising power of simple messages, I'd like to welcome to the podcast, Ben Guttmann.
Welcome to the Engaging Personalities Podcast. I'm Anders Belanger, founder and CEO of Engagify, where we're on a mission to rehumanize business through engagement. We believe that we can all be more successful if we can command attention and deepen connection. So stick around to the end of the show and we'll reveal how you can be our next guest on a future episode. So let's get ready to engage.
Ben, welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Anders.
Yeah, I'm passionate about simplifying, and I almost gave it away before we started recording, and I kind of don't like to let the magic out of the bottle too soon, so I had to shut myself up. But from my working at trade shows for technology companies, and I'm often introducing speakers from different companies who come in and then talk about technology, the complexity is off the charts. It is crazy, and so I understand the need to simplify our communications. So I'm glad that's why you're here and why you wrote the book. Before we get into that though, can we kind of rewind and start at the start? And how did you come into marketing, being a professor at Baruch College, from all of that stuff? How did you fall into this line of work and understanding why we need to simplify?
Oh, certainly. So I ran a marketing agency for 10 years. It was a ton of fun. I started in an old professor's basement, and we worked with the local camera shop, the local ice cream shop. And then bit by bit, we started to work on slightly bigger things. We got a bigger office, we got employees, we got more people, we have more clients. And then 10 years later, we're working with brands like the NFL and Comcast and all these, and I Love New York, and these great clients. And then one day we wake up and say, you know what, I've done this for 10 years, so I want to do it for the next 10 years. And so that was, that was sometime around COVID, a little bit after that. And we sold the business about a year and a half ago. And since then, it's been, I've been working on a number of different projects. The book is one of them. And the book is a big piece of the book was, well, what do you hire a marketing agency for? A lot of times you're hiring them to tell the world your story and why it matters, and then get them to do something for it. And so in the act of marketing every day, we would be answering this question, which is, why do some messages work and others don't? But you don't really understand it until you're able to take a step back and look at it and have the space afterwards. And so after I sold the business, that question still kind of nagged at me, which is, well, what makes for effective communication, be it marketing or otherwise? Marketing just happens to be the industry that people hire to go tell people things. But if you're an executive, if you're an advocate, if you're a teacher, you have to communicate things in a way that connects with your audience. And so I began to look into that more and more, and ultimately arrived at this foundation for what I wrote in Simply Put.
Awesome. So I have to admit, I have not read your book yet. Notice the key word there. It will be on my reading list. So when doing your research, what were some of the key findings, or what did you find in terms of, researching simplicity or simple, clear communications?
Well, it turns out that there's this really fundamental problem with how we communicate. And there's this divide. So stripping everything else away, there are senders and there are receivers, right? Sender is an advertiser, advocate, leader, something like that. Receiver is the buyer, the voter, and the donor. We all wear both of them. We all wear both of those hats. Even in the same conversation, we're sending and receiving back and forth. But I like to simplify it appropriately, because it gets rid of all of the things, the what about this, the what about that. There's senders and there's receivers. When we are receivers, we want to get information. We want to get communication in a certain way. And when we're senders, we're really unable to meet them there a lot of times. So this word that I kept on running across was fluency when I was doing my research. So you can be fluent in, we know this word in our day-to-day lives, fluent in English or Spanish or Mandarin. You can be fluent in cooking or cheese or whatever. Wherever you're fluent, things are easy, right? It's flowing. That's the original Latin root for the word fluent. So if you ask a cognitive scientist, though, about the word fluency, well, they're going to tell you it describes this entire suite of experiences where something is, in layman's terms, easy to take from out in the world, stick in your head, and make sense of. When it takes less work for you to perceive it and to process it, it's more fluent.
Hey, by the way, Ben,
more fluent,
thank you for simplifying fluency for us, because I've come across that too, and it's like, technical terms and jargon, that's one of the places where things get away on us. So let me continue. Go.
Oh, 100%. Oh yeah, that's exactly. And so when something is fluent, we are more likely to trust it, more likely to like it, more likely to buy it. All the things we want, right? As a marketer, as anybody who has something to say, we want those things. The inverse is also true. When something is less fluent, when something is harder for us to see, to hear, to process, well, okay, less likely to like it, less likely to trust it, less likely to buy it. And that's obviously not the state that we want to get to. So as a receiver, we want fluency. But as a sender, internally and externally, we are battling forces that make us complicate things, that make us add instead of subtract. We have an additive bias in our brains. It makes us hide behind kind of dense slides and add more stuff to satisfy a higher up or look good on your resume. All those things push us in one direction, but as a receiver, we want stuff over here. So there's this gap in the middle. And that's what I try to identify. That's what I've identified as the core problem of a lot of communication. And then how to bridge that. The research continues, and I've identified 5 design principles that we can use to help us get across it.
Wow, that's great. There's so much to unpack in what you just said. But let's go from where. We talk about those 5 design principles, because I think that seems to be the next logical place to go with this. Because anyways, I have so many things going through my head. All right, let's talk about the 5, and we'll unpack other things in a bit.
Absolutely. And so these are not a rubric. It's not a step-by-step. It is, I call them design principles. So my background's in design, right? Designers arrange things to solve a problem. And the problem is, well, we have something here, and we want to connect the two of them. So the first one is beneficial. What does it matter to the receiver? What's in it for them? The second one is focused. Are you trying to say one thing, or are you trying to say multiple things at once? The third is salient. Or does your message stand out from the noise? Does it rise up? Does it come to your attention? Does it contrast? The fourth is empathetic. Are you speaking in the language that the audience understands? Are you meeting them where they are, both in the language itself, but also emotionally, motivation-wise? That's the root of empathy. And the last one is minimal. Have you cut out everything you don't need and you're focusing just on what has to be there? And so each one of those, the more you can activate on them, the better you're going to be about closing that gap between complicated and simple.
So much of what I've heard and learned and what I teach in terms of making slides for presentations, this really does resonate, because there's so often you have people trying to put too many ideas on a slide, right? So that's lacking focus, and it's not minimalism, right? That would be some of those things I see. Also, some sort of chart or some sort of schematic that just has way too much going on, and it's like what they always say, like an eye chart, right? It's just hard to read. So I want to dig into something that I think you probably talk about, and you did mention the fact that what we think we need to say, right? And in terms of what marketing tells us to say or put in our presentation, what maybe we have a curse of knowledge thing happening where we want to sound smart. Can you speak to some of those things and why we feel so compelled to like not be simple about things and not be clear?
Oh yeah. Well, you mentioned the slides. I always like to say that slides are free. Use as many as you want, but make them simpler, right? Because sometimes minimal, by the way, we're not talking about the fewest number of slides or words or paragraphs. We're talking about the least amount of friction. And so sometimes that does mean more slides or more pages or more sections on your website. So that's one piece. But to answer your question about why do we sometimes feel like we need to complicate? Well, we often complicate when we feel like we're not measuring up, right? When we feel that we don't know our stuff as well, when we're scared of what the response is going to be, when we're worried about our status. So there's this one study I came across, which I love, and I think it's a good kind of symbol of this example. So in the U.S., there's about 150 or so international airports, and these range from the big giant airports like here in New York, like JFK, with hundreds or thousands of flights a week, to the small ones like in Montana, where I visited my grandmother years ago, Great Falls International Airport, which just has one flight maybe to your neck of the woods, right, in Winnipeg. These airports can be vastly different in scale, but they all call themselves international, and there's some sort of kind of status that comes along with that, right? Yeah. These researchers, what they did was they looked at how do all these airports talk about themselves, and what they found was that they broke it up into small airports and big airports. Big airports would refer to themselves in their own marketing material on their website as international, as to say, JFK International or JFK International Airport instead of just saying JFK. They would refer to themselves about a third of the time, 30% of the time or so, they would call themselves international. But when you looked at the small airports, how would they refer to themselves most frequently? Well, 70% of the time, they call themselves international, right? So the small ones can kind of give away their, the story a little bit, kind of give away the plot by it's using the dressing of this complicated, of this jargon, of this big language. The same phenomenon happened when those researchers looked at universities, right? There are universities that grant a ton of PhDs. There are ones that only have a couple programs. The ones that only have a couple programs, they all call themselves university. But the ones that that do a lot, some call themselves university, some call themselves a college or an institute, and it's this difference between, we think sometimes that the big language makes us seem really smart or like a big deal or like high status, but often it showcases just the opposite.
It's a lot of posturing in a sense, right? Like just this kind of being overstating perhaps. It reminds me a lot. We've done a lot of training of systems engineers, in terms of communication and presentation tips and strategies. And one of the things that I was taught by one of these systems engineers at one of the technology clients is there's something they call engineeritis. And engineeritis, and maybe you've heard of this, is that you always want to sound like you're the smartest person in the room. So that is how you communicate, as opposed to trying to be clear instead of clever, right? This idea of simplifying it down. So my whole thing when I work with those guys is like, why are you talking like this? Like, I remember one time there was a thing with Siemens, and they were talking about, basically solar panel fields, right? And this guy was talking about in areas of high solar radiation. And I'm like, are you saying like the Sunshine States, or what are you talking about? Like, just
in sunny places.
That's right. Like, let's just talk plain language. So that's built into us, like that's kind of been wired into us. How do we overcome that? Is it like, you just got to drill it into people? Do they have to get over themselves, or what have you found that helps people, try to avoid that trap?
Oh, I mean, that's really hard, right? Just because something is simple doesn't mean it's easy. It actually takes because of all those things I talked about, where our programming is, and internally and externally, pushes us in one direction. Every time we try to get simple, it's going to be work, right? It's going to take us the blood, sweat, and tears of getting to that direction. There are a number of tools I some I have in the book. I think overall, though, it's the most important thing you can do is talk to your audience. And this seems like the most kind of no duh thing for anybody in marketing to say, is that, or in communications, is test your message. You go talk to people, go flag people down on the street, call up a friend that works in that fits the target market of who you're trying to talk to. Do a little survey or focus group. You don't have to spend a ton of money and time to do all these things. People don't like to do that because they're scared of the results. They're scared of the awkwardness of doing it. And therefore they just kind of stay in their bubbles. They just sit there and they say, well, I'm going to use that, areas of high solar radiation because the other people in the room are using that word, instead of, well, who the hell are you talking to and what do they call this thing? That's the most important yardstick, is respecting the receiver and speaking their language, meeting them where they are.
Yeah. I mean, I've found this as being a trade show infotainer for different companies, where we're actually talking about their technology in an entertaining presentation, which happens to have magic and different interesting demonstrations. I have to dumb it down so I can understand it, And so I sometimes act as a filter to then communicate it at a level that everyone can understand, because I'm not going to go down those roads. And the feedback that I've received is that I had one woman come up to me at a network security conference that she was a spouse. So she was not in the industry. And she went around to all the different presentations and she came up to me and she said, yours was the only one I could understand. Right. And so
high praise, right?
Which is high praise. But at the same time, there's going to be some people who go, well, she's not the ICP. She's not the ideal customer profile, right? Like she's not in the industry, and it's like almost like we're sometimes looking for reasons to be able to keep using our jargon, right? To kind of justify it in a sense. But coming back to that simplifying things, there is almost like a magic power or superpower to convey complex ideas in a very simple way. And when I see a good slide and I watch the people pull out their phones and take a picture of it because they'll be able to explain it to their boss, there's something so beautiful about that. And I think people get paid a lot of money to simplify things, right? Just as kind of a kind of thing. So what are some other tips? Like, I mean, maybe everything branches out from those 5 key findings, but are there other things that our listeners can have as takeaways to kind of like, oh, I got to watch that, or I got to watch myself, or a sense of awareness?
Oh yeah. I think you're right. When you see something that is so just dumbfoundingly simple and gets it, it just sparkles, right? Like it sticks with you in a way that everything else that you heard that day just doesn't. I tell the story sometimes of I've had bad luck with my teeth. I blame my genetics. But I go and I was at the dentist one day, and he's digging away in there doing whatever terrible thing, but he says, "You only have to floss the teeth you want to keep." You only have to. I'm like, well, boom. Immediately I got it, right? I never missed a day of flossing again after that, right? You only have to floss the teeth you want to keep. That shows both kind of saliency, because it's a little bit different. It's not what you're expecting to hear from the dentist, but also it's empathy, because he's understanding who I am, what I need to hear, kind of the language that I'm going to speak in. And it's something that has stuck with me, for years and years since then. But if you do want another, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I heard that term before, but it was it was Zig Ziglar, the speaker. and of course he said it in this kind of like, only floss the teeth you want to keep, and it's not, but he was talking about dental health care. He was just talking about habits, right? But that does cut right to it. What was the next thing you wanted to say?
I was just going to say one other kind of takeaway, if you want a quick little shortcut, and there's a number of these I put in there, but this one I think is top of mind for me, because I saw. Did you see the Taylor Swift concert movie, the Eras Tour that she did recently?
I have not seen that yet. No.
So I like her, sort of. My wife's a big fan, so I went along with her. I'm not as big of a fan as her, but I appreciate her music and her songwriting. But what she does better than anybody else, and the only other person that I have seen that does this maybe to the same level of expertise, is possibly Bill Clinton, actually, who she is able to, in a stadium of 70,000 people, make every single person feel like she is speaking directly to them, that it's just a one-on-one conversation. She's not speaking to a crowd, she's speaking to one person. And Bill Clinton famously did this a lot when he was campaigning back in the 90s. But Taylor Swift also is able to do this transcending through kind of space and time on like a movie theater. Months later, thousands of miles away, she's in the theater there, and every single person in that theater felt that, both the kind of lyrics, obviously, but also like kind of the introductions, the banter, that was directed to one person. And that is the other big secret here, is don't speak to a crowd, because a crowd doesn't really exist. A crowd, yes, there can be lots of people, there's mob mentality, all those different psychological things. But for the most part, when you're making your decision about, do you like something? Are you going to vote for somebody? Are you going to go buy something? Doesn't matter if the commercial is being blasted to 100 million people at the Super Bowl. You're making that decision in your own head. It's one-to-one, right? It's from that sender to you individually in your brain as a receiver. So the more you can write and speak and just advertise and present to one person, the more effective you're going to be.
So Ben, that makes me think that, is intimacy, because there is a sense of that, right? With the way that Taylor Swift's communicating, Bill Clinton, again, you're thousands of people, but you feel like you're one-on-one with him. I don't know how to put this, but does making something intimate simplify it? Or are we talking about different things? Or does simplifying make it more intimate? I don't know.
That's interesting. I haven't thought of that angle. I do think that there's certainly some overlap to that. I think that I think that there's definitely momentum in both directions, right? Simplicity is going to feel like it connects deeper to you, so therefore automatically it's going to be a little bit more intimate. But then also something that is going to appeal to you intimately is likely going to feel that way as well too. So I think there's some really interesting connection between those two ideas.
Yeah. There's something else that I wanted to bring up too, was that in our research, and we're teaching, engagement strategies and trying to get people to, watch you and listen to you, and then, build that connection. One of the things that I saw, and correct me if you found better research than this, is that, our brain is only 2% of our body weight, and yet it consumes something like 20% of our energy. So your brain is very selective as what it pays attention to. And then there can be, I think the term's cognitive backlog, which again could be simplified down to overwhelm. But was that something that you came across too, that, if things are too complex, we just stop paying attention altogether?
Absolutely. So we evolved in a world where a lot more things wanted to eat us than today, right? And so we, in many ways, we evolved to notice a lot of things that were different and that stood out, but also to quickly, put them in and discard them, right? If it wasn't relevant to me, if it wasn't something worth my attention, which is an incredibly finite resource, it immediately gets tossed by the wayside. We don't record things like a camera. A few people do. There's actually a couple known disorders or injuries people have had, where it does create this effect of somebody having, effectively photographic memory. But, it's not an enjoyable experience. Whenever you ask those people and look at their interviews, they end up having very kind of painful lives, because we're meant to forget things, right? So it's not a bug. It's a feature that we forget a lot of things. And so that being the case, we have to, if we're somebody with something to say, we have to connect it to what somebody's existing motivations are. And that's when I talk about kind of beneficial, it's the kind of sales 101, features versus benefits, right? We don't want the features, we want the benefits. We don't want the thing, we want what the thing does for us. And when we put that lens on, well, then we can much more clearly see, okay, where can we actually connect with our audience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, I wonder, when you were writing the book, did you catch yourself at all not being as communicating as clearly as you possibly could? Because I have to admit, when I was putting together some trainings during the pandemic, we were teaching engagement, I had this big acronym. Well, it was a big, long acronym. And my first S in the acronym was for simplify. And I went, oh crap, I got to make this shorter, right? Like, it was like, I wasn't even following my own, thing. Did you have that experience yourself?
Oh my God. Absolutely. I would never recommend anybody writes this type of book. I enjoyed writing it, but it puts you 100% on the burner at all times, in both the book itself, in stuff like an interview, and in whatever else I do on the web or on social media. I have to take my own medicine, right? And so in particular, when I was looking at like the cover, the title, the subtitle, the text in the back here, it needed to be spot on, because if I was not fulfilling my promise in this piece, well, then why would you trust me for everything else? So this is like the one book you kind of like should judge by its cover a little bit, right? And I cut this off at the pass here in the beginning. The first sentence in the book is, look, I fully understand the irony here. I wrote a 208-page book about how to keep things simple. Sounds like I didn't take my own advice, right? But as we've been talking about, the why is really deep, and the how is surprisingly hard. So that's where we get those other 207 pages. If it's just enough to say, hey, say things simply, then don't buy it. I mean, then don't read it. That's enough. But if you want to go into the process, into the science, that's what I tried to capture here.
Yeah. I'm glad that you held yourself to account, because I mean, it's easy to not, make those moments of truth that you so cared about. Hey, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Ben. Where can people reach out to you? Let's talk about the book. Where can they buy the book? Amazon, I'm going to guess. Anywhere you find good business books.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me, Anders. This has been a total blast. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. If you go to my website, benguttmann.com, there's 2 T's and 2 N's in Guttmann. There's links there to all the other retailers that have it. There's also a free chapter download that I put together. You can go find that there and sign up. Connect with me on LinkedIn, sign up for my email list, all these things, and just reach out if you feel like this has been helpful, or there's something else that you have a question about.
Well, I know I'm going to actually order it right after we get off, and because I know I'll get something out of it. And I struggle keeping things simple myself, and I try to think I'm good at that, but it's a struggle. So thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your time and sharing with us how to be more clear with our communications.
Awesome. Thanks again, Anders.
All right. And to all our listeners, I hope you learned something here from Ben. And until next time, stay engaged.
Thank you so much for listening to Engaging Personalities. If you believe this world needs more engagement and you're an industry leader, or you have an interesting take on rehumanizing business, go to go.engagify.ai/podcast-guest to apply and come on the show. If you got something out of this interview, do you mind sharing it on your social media? Just grab a quick screenshot with your phone and text it to a friend, or post it on the socials. If you know someone that would be a great guest, tag them on social media to let them know about the show. Include the hashtag Engaging Personalities. I love seeing your posts and guest suggestions. We are regularly putting out new episodes and content. To make sure you don't miss any episode, go ahead and subscribe. Your thumbs up, ratings, and reviews go a long way to help promote the show and mean a lot to me and my team. Want to know more? Go to our website, engagify.ai, or follow me on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening, and stay engaged.